When you're running a stick weld, there's a whole lot to think about, but if you break it down into simple steps, it's really a lot more manageable. Hey, welcome to the shop. Today I'm going to show you a video that I wish I had when I was getting started with stick welding, and that is breaking a bead down into 5 different steps and what are the things you need to think about as you work through those. Now this is the big picture video, so I won't go into all of the details of each of these different parts of the weld, but I have them in my online courses and hundreds of videos online. Now the first step is your setup, and I'm going to select my electrode based on this 1/4 inch thick plate that I'll be welding, and so I'll use a 1/8 inch 7018. If it's under a 1/4 inch, I use smaller than 1/8. If it's over, I pretty much use a 1/8 for everything, and I'm using Lincoln Excalibur 7018s. They're my favorite. There's some light mill scale on this material, and these strip discs can clean it off. Now, you don't always have to do this. It's not required even by a lot of codes, but it does make a little bit of a difference in how it runs. Let's just run a little bead, half of it on the cleaned part and half on the mill scale, so you can see how much of a difference it really makes. And a lot of times I won't, just because it's not worth the time, but it does make a difference in my opinion. So after I removed the slag, if you look there on the left, it's just tied in a little bit better. It's a little smoother than it was running on top of the mill scale. You can have a sound weld either way, with or without this light mill scale when you're stick welding, but it doesn't take too long to remove. So if something's pretty important to you, it's probably worth the extra effort to clean it off. Now I'm running the HTP Revolution 2500. This is my favorite welding machine because it does pretty much every process and it just works without much messing around. So I'm putting my electrode holder on positive and changing it to stick mode. And you just need to select your amperage with most machines for stick welding. There are some other settings, but they don't make that much of a difference in most cases. So I have my amperage set here, and the next step is the start. And if you've ever experienced that, I'm going to show you how to have it go a little better. So the end of your electrode is bare metal, and you need to touch that to make a little spark. And on a used electrode, sometimes it gets coated with slag or flux, and you have to break that off with your glove, or sometimes even a file, or hit it on your workpiece. Now to strike an arc, you can either tap or strike like a match. The lighter you do it, the better from my experience. If you just barely touch it to make a spark, it's much less likely to stick. Most people stick because they're hitting it a little bit too hard. Now, when I go to actually strike my arc, I'll just start it lightly like I'd showed, and then quickly get right into the run of the weld, holding a really short arc length. And that brings us to the next step in the process, and that is running a bead. Now, when you're running a bead, there are really 3 things to pay attention to that make all the difference. First one is your arc length. This is a big deal. You need to keep it really short. Notice how that flux, it's just barely above the material. Now, I'm also holding a consistent angle. Notice it's pointed backwards just a little bit to push some of that slag or melted flux back behind the material. And the third thing is my travel speed, because the travel speed is going to control the width or size of your bead. So you watch your weld puddle, and if you need a bigger weld, you can slow down. If you need a smaller one, you can speed up. So if you're getting inconsistent results, that's why. Notice when I stop, I flick the end of the rod, and that little bit of slag comes off the end. That's going to make it easier to restart. So I'm showing that a few times. Now, the next step is a restart. You often need to stop partially through a bead because either your electrode runs out or you get in a bind or some other reason. And so it's important to know how to restart. So even though I flicked the slag off, there's still a little bit of flux that I need to chip off with my glove. And I got a little extra here, so there is some risk of porosity on the start. So if I absolutely can't have that, I should use a new rod. But in this case, I think it'll be fine. I start up ahead of the end of my welder, that crater, and loop back into it. See, when I start ahead of it, then I'll be welding over and kind of cleaning up any mess that I make with it, and I won't leave any arc strikes, and I'm back into the run of my bead exactly like I was before. Now, when I stop at the end of the bead, I'm going to do something different than I would if I know I'm going to have a restart. What I'm going to do in this case is I'll actually pause my travel here and feed a little bit of rod in at the end to fill the crater. So watch, I'll stop moving forward, Just feed in a little rod and then flick that off to fill my crater. And here is that finished result. Notice it's a little bit higher, or I have a little bit more reinforcement at the restart. I do that on purpose because that's a weak point and I'd rather have a little bit more reinforcement. You don't have to pause there to add that much, but I think it's a good practice from a strength perspective. Now that is the overall bead. Now I realized that I ran it over the mill scale after I made that whole thing about it's better without mill scale. You know, it works either way. Now here we're going to put it all together and run a joint. So when I'm working on a T-joint, I start my weld there at the end and I need to pause to get my puddle established, but not for too long before I get moving. Now I'm welding down into that corner, which gives some extra arc length, so I'm just about scrubbing the flux on the side. And after I stop, I'm going to chip a little bit of slag right out of that crater, and I'll do the same thing for my restart, where I'll strike an arc up ahead of the weld, loop back through, and then I'm off to the races again, and I'm maintaining my arc length, my electrode angle, and my travel speed. Those are the three variables that I'm paying attention to here while I'm running a bead until I get up to the end. And at the end, I'm going to pause really briefly at the end to build up a little extra material in the crater, and then flick that rod to terminate the weld. And I can remove some slag, and you see that we got pretty much the same result. Let's clean this off a little bit better with a wire wheel. If you're new here, be sure to wear eye protection with this. Of all the tools, those little wires coming out can be the worst. But we got a good sound weld. That'll hold very, very strong just by following those simple steps. Now, if you really want to break this down even more into some fundamental practice exercises where I'll walk you through step by step, I have some affordable online courses linked in the description below, 39 bucks a course, and I'll walk through the whole journey with you and it'll save you a ton of time. And if you enjoyed this or learned something, let me know by hitting that thumbs up below. We'll see you next time.